Hello, welcome to the Better Ways podcast. I'm Tom.
And I'm Jamie, a rather snotty Jamie today, but still Jamie.
Yes, so sorry to hear that, Jamie.
Yeah,
Hope you feel
I
better
have an immune
soon.
system that just doesn't exist, really.
Oh dear, that's not a good
Yeah.
sign in today's world.
No,
Hopefully, we'll keep
I've
it
always had a
short.
weak, I've always had a weak immune system, and yeah, as I said to you earlier, my wife and I had some visitors last weekend, including two
Hmm.
children, and obviously for some reason I'm like it's weird, like baby slash animal whisperer, where they all just love me and
Yeah.
just crawl all over me and want to play with me, and and that's great. But unfortunately, it means that they can sneeze on me and cough on me, and
Do you take
everything
any
else.
supplements? I mean, we're great
Yeah,
believers in vitamin D
yeah,
supplements. You
yeah,
can take
yeah.
things like
Take that.
K2 and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
I
it
supplement
does. It's
quite
not
heavily.
foolproof.
No, I do supplement
Yeah,
quite
yeah,
heavily.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. But I think it's one of
Yeah.
those where I don't, because I work from home,
Hmm.
as you know, so and I spend
Yeah.
most of my time indoors.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is what it is.
Okay.
Mhm.
So we'll make it a quick one. We'll give you a bit of a
Yeah,
rest.
no problems.
Um, Something we probably should talk about because we've not done it so far. There's been quite a few events in the last few months.
Mm,
Is the royal family,
mm,
um, which can be controversial for some, but we recently had the coronation of King Charles III,
yeah,
watched by many but not all,
yeah.
opposed by some. So, what's
Yeah.
your take on the royal family and its relevance today? Whether we should have a monarchy, the pros and cons, what you think of Charles?
Mm. Well, I'm a bit of a wally, and I freely admit that. So I tend to feel sorry for people sometimes in much more privileged positions than me. It's really
Right.
weird. Really weird. Like if I see like an ex-millionaire who's fallen on a
Yeah.
really hard time, I'm like, oh God, I hope they're okay. It's weird.
Mm.
It's weird. I don't know why my brain does that, but the reason I say that is because I feel sorry for the
Mm.
royal family, even though they lead lives of immense privilege.
Mm.
And I think for me, fame is a curse. A lot of people look at fame as being a good thing. I don't think it is. I think fame is a
Right.
curse. I think money is great. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to be rich,
Yeah.
but I certainly wouldn't want to be famous.
Mm.
And so you're in this weird position where you have a group of people that are all in incredibly privileged positions, but as we know
Hmm.
from Harry's constant moaning, that does come with a huge amount of costs. So I feel
Yeah.
sorry for them. That's step one. To answer your
Mm.
question in more detail, I'm not a monarchist at
Right.
all. I think it's a redundant hangover. But unlike a lot of people, I don't have any aggression or
Mm.
ill will towards them or the institution. I just think it's time that
Yeah.
the institution went away. I'm glad they have no real sovereign power, so to speak. I
Hmm.
think if they did, I'd be quite anti them.
Mm.
But I think they're a hangover. They're good for tourism, though how much is
Mm.
debatable depending on who you believe. But no, I think it's time for them to go. I think all the grounds, the trappings, if you like, they're still
Mm.
part of our history. So I think people can still come and visit them. This is
Mm.
where the royal family lived for 1,000 years. This is blah 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 blah, all that stuff.
Mm.
So I think in that sense it's good. But yeah, I just don't see. Like I saw Piers Morgan defending them the other day, and he said, if you replace them with a president, who would you choose? Who would you choose? And he
Yeah.
kept
Yeah.
pushing. Who would you
Yeah.
choose? He was looking for this paragon that had nothing wrong with
Yeah.
them,
Yeah.
and that was irrelevant. That was like, Piers. That's not the point. The point is
Mm.
a head of state should be elected. And he was like, yeah, but would you want Boris Johnson? I was like, you're missing the point. If the people chose Boris Johnson, then yes, Boris Johnson should get the job. It's about
Yeah.
choice, isn't it? The idea that whichever womb you come out of dictates your authority in life is well, it does to a degree when you think about
Mm.
things like privilege and luck and all the rest of it. But yeah, no. So for me, I would have made now make Charles the last one
Mm.
and disband the monarchy after that.
Right.
How about you?
Okay. I'm a bit different, I think.
Hmm.
I mean, I agree that it seems like anachronistic, and obviously having a hereditary system has its problems. But I
Hmm.
think so. I think there's a few things that are good about the monarchy, which I'm actually quite in favour of. So the first is that in America, the classic thing is you've got three branches of government. You've got the
Hmm.
legislature, which is Congress making its laws. You've got the judiciary, the courts, the Supreme Court, and you've got the executive, which is the presidency and the executive. And there's lots of checks and balances to put those together, so it's hard to make any changes.
Hmm.
Well, we've actually got a fourth branch. We've got the symbolic, which is what the monarchy represents. So
Hmm.
one of the advantages of that is you're not mixing up your political leader with your head of state. So the person who represents your country and your people is not the same as the person who represents your current government. And I think that has a few advantages. One is that one of the things that the Queen did extremely well, and Charles seems to be doing so far, is one of the roles of the office is not to express any opinion, not to have a view, to have a convening power, to listen to people, to bring people together, but not to express a view. And obviously with the presidency, combining it in one, as it's done in the US system. I know you're not necessarily talking about that, but combining it in one means that you mix up the political with that. So your head of state, you have a party political view, and that will change, which I think is one problem. But the other thing is, I think it's really useful that when we've had people like Boris Johnson and Liz Truss and others, I think it's really useful that they have to go every week and talk to somebody who's actually above them and give an account for what they're doing and have a conversation and have actually, in some way, answer for what they're doing. I think that's useful for a political leader not to be at the top of the tree. So I think that's sort of a practical purpose, which is useful. I also think the symbolism is really important to people. So I think we saw that with the Queen's funeral. We've seen that with the popularity. We've seen that popularity of royal weddings. We've seen that with Charles's coronation. That actually having something symbolic that represents the country, that brings people together, as anachronistic, and drenched in tradition as it is, it does give people a sort of sense of greater purpose and meaning. Now, you could say that, well, all these sort of strange traditions of gold carriages and horses and fancy uniforms and silly hats, why are we doing that when it's not very modern? It doesn't reflect who we are today. But the thing is that the whole point of a tradition is to have something different, a spectacle, something to believe in. And I think that is, if we tried to invent a modern version of that, it would probably be very tied to a current fashion and date very quickly. I'd imagine you'd bring in, current designers to design a look and decide on what we did. And if you think about the 2012 Olympics, that's dated badly. So I think that if you're going to have a tradition and a symbolism that it stands for anything, is some kind of long-term enduring spirit to bring people together, then it is inevitably going to have a timeless look to it and a feel to it, and involve traditions that don't change all the time. So I think that symbolic level plays quite an important part in people's lives. And when it's absent and they don't have a religion to fall back on, then I think there is less that pulls us together, there's less that brings us together. So I think that's one of the reasons. It's not the only reason, but that's one of the reasons why I think there's a more united sense of Britishness than there is a united sense of Americanness. There are other reasons too, but but before I go on from that, yeah. So the other thing is, I think from a practical level, it's fantastic for tourism. It's a great money spinner for bringing people in. And you'd have all of these royal palaces and other things that you'd have to maintain anyway, most of which are paid for by the state anyway. But you wouldn't have the draw to bring people in to bring, if there was no active royal family, it wasn't being used, it was just an interesting old building. It might be taken over by the National Trust or something, but you're going to bring in less money. So I think on the money front, I think it's a net. My view is it's a net plus. It brings more in than it costs. Now on the hereditary part, and I think this is important. Obviously anything hereditary is, or why should that person have that position or whatever. Yeah. Although as you say, I think it's somewhat of a prison to be born into that life, because you have very little say over what you do and who you are. You might be lucky to be minor enough that you're out of the spotlight and don't have too many duties. But these days in the shrinking royal family, that's less common. Yeah. So, there's that aspect. But also, I think what it does mean is these people have a heck of a lot of training for this role of being a sovereign, where you're not supposed to take side, where you're supposed to be non-partisan, where you're not supposed to speak your view, where you're supposed to represent something bigger than yourself. And I cannot for the life of me see that you would get that if you had an elected head of state. Because the problem with the elected head of state is that the people who you want are not going to be the people who run for it, who want it. And somebody who's in the public spotlight for their views or their campaigning or their country, is not going to be able to be impartial, and have not had that preparation. And so I think I think that would give rise to a problem where if you separate the two, which I think is what you're suggesting, so not like the American system, so we have a prime minister and a president.
Yeah.
Whoever runs for president is going to want more things to do than they would
Mm,
get, and not have had the prep for it. So I think that's a problem.
mm,
You could potentially have an appointed head of
mm,
state, but I think you're running into the same problem that though you might appoint someone who has had done good deeds. You know, it's a bit like perhaps the citizen appointed honours.
mm.
You might appoint somebody who's been good in their field, but would they be any good at being head of state? I mean, it's a very strange job. It's a very different job. Maybe you could have a training program and all the rest of it, but then
Yeah, yeah,
so I think you could do that, and you could have modernise it. But as I say, I think you'd lose a lot of the. You'd struggle to change the traditions, and the traditions wouldn't make
yeah.
sense with an appointed or an elected president. The traditions wouldn't make any sense. So you'd have to change a lot of them because all of the symbolism is all about them representing God and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
being one step away from God and representing the nation. So when I think about the totality of that, despite all the obvious flaws, I'm in favour of it continuing in a perhaps a slimmed down form, which I think is what King Charles wants to do.
Mm,
And I think there's an awful lot of good work done, by whoever is in that role. And this could be done by somebody elected or appointed too, where they go
mm,
around and they meet people and they talk to them and they listen to them and they convene groups and they open things and
mm,
they're a visible representation of the country locally
mm,
and around the Commonwealth.
mm.
So that's really where I'm at on it. I think it's a bit different, but that's where I'm at on it.
Made some really good points. Some I hadn't considered really. I guess the only questions, yeah, that I'd kind of throw into the mix with that is, yeah, I get the link to history. That's very true. If you do sever the human embodiment of that, yeah, you can't really replace it with an elected, you know, stranger from the street. That is a bit odd.
Mm.
And the being next to God thing, or step down from God, that as well. But I don't know how important that is. I do get that, and actually the sense of, does it unite us? Maybe, yeah. I guess for certain people it does. I guess my brain then started flipping over to, well, how could you make it work with an elected representative? So
Mm.
obviously we need to have
Well,
that.
that's where I'm sceptical. The
Yeah,
elected
yeah.
bit.
But I'm like running this thought experiment, like,
Yeah,
and I
sure.
think for step one, you'd have to say they couldn't have short terms. So it would have to be
Yes.
like,
A life appointment.
unless you choose to step down, you're
Yeah.
in there for 20 years or something. You get 20-year contract
Or
basically,
life. Yeah.
or life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Until
yeah, yeah,
you can choose to step down.
yeah. You could choose.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe like I like the idea of 20 years because then it gives the people something to look forward to and
Hmm.
celebrate when you get a
Hmm.
new person go
Right.
in.
Yeah.
And I guess if
Fair enough.
what would we want the head of state to represent? Okay, our
Mm.
history definitely
Mm.
the good bits, not the bad.
Yeah.
That's very upsetting to people. Um, but then I don't know. It's almost how do you? It's
So
almost
I
like you
think
want to,
here's the problem. So can you name somebody who might be a good candidate?
right. No, that is a really good point because it'd have to be like you said. It'd have to be politically neutral.
Hmm.
And
I mean,
but I
let's
was wondering,
supposing you said David Attenborough. He's not politically neutral.
no, he's not politically neutral. No, no.
Lovely though he
I
is,
think someone,
and a national
someone could.
treasure though he is,
He is a national treasure. Could
and
someone
no
slot
doubt he'd
into that
win.
role? Yeah, yeah, he probably would. Could someone slot into that role? And then you'd have to have like an oversight committee to make sure that person was fulfilling their duties in the right way, i.e., being
Mm.
politically neutral. But
Yeah.
then again, you
I
almost
mean,
want
you'd
to
have a
go,
royal
well,
household still, and there is an
oh,
infrastructure for all of that that
yeah.
exists. Yeah,
But I'm trying to think. So you almost want to design the role first, as in what do you
yeah,
want this role to achieve? And you're
mm.
right to represent us, our history, our values on
Mm.
the world stage, all that stuff. Absolutely right. Totally agree with that. But then I like the idea what you said. There was something key there, like the prime minister has to go and report to somebody else to
Yes, has to
justify
make
what
an
they're doing.
account for themselves. The president doesn't have to
Yeah,
do that.
that's
Yeah.
really good. If you could have someone
Mm.
sitting above them who could do that again, they'd have to be politically neutral. But then
Mm.
in my head, and I don't know how you would do it. It's unworkable, which is why it's an interesting. It's like we're trying
Mm.
to redesign a society here.
That's
But
why we're here.
yes, absolutely, it's what we don't get paid for. If you had someone that held the head of the head of the government to account and the government to account in terms of you agreed these things on your manifesto.
Mm,
This is what you told people. Okay, you were elected on this body, on this body of work that you said you were going to do. You've now backed
mm,
away from this, and that head of state had some power to hold the government to account. So it would get
mm,
rid of that politicians lying, saying whatever they said, and then doing their own thing. So
mm,
almost, it's almost, we almost have like in some ways an anti-democratic system, because you can lie, get your sales pitch done, put the brochure in front
mm.
of your customer, get the deal, and then do bugger all with implementation, back off and do whatever you
Yeah,
want.
yeah.
So if is there a way that the person sitting above them would go, right, okay, my job is to make sure that you do what you promised
Mm,
the citizenry of the country that you would do, okay, whilst doing these other things as well. But then I think you could take it one step further and go, is how would you, I don't know, like is the UK represented fairly and equally, so you don't get that north-south divide again?
yeah.
We are a United Kingdom, we've got four different nations that make up that. Are
Mm,
they represented and treated fairly? So you could have the person whose job it was, and hopefully that would bring people like the Scottish independence movement, for example, might die away a little bit if they felt like there was someone actually going, you know what, there
So
is
you're
someone people.
thinking? I mean, obviously, you'd have to appoint and not just one person to be king,
Mhm.
but or whatever or
Yeah,
president. But you'd have
yeah.
they'd need they'd need a whole staff, like
It
the
needs
current
staff.
family
Yeah,
provides. So
yeah,
potentially, you could
absolutely.
have people elected from Wales, from Scotland, from Northern
Yeah,
Ireland, from England, and somebody elected overall from within that.
yeah,
So
yeah,
you assemble a family of personalities.
yeah.
But would it work as a group? Would they
I don't know.
agree? I mean, so you can point to lots of dysfunctions in the royal family, but they are at least a
Mm,
biological family. It's
mm,
they are
mm.
related, and maybe it would work. Maybe it would work
I
better.
don't know.
Um,
I'm just curious as a thought
because
experiment.
one
And
person couldn't do all the
yeah,
work, couldn't replace. I mean, you
no,
have a lot of working royals,
you would have a lot of working people, but I
and they
just
have to
think
be public people. Um,
yes, they would. Yeah, they 100% would. But I like the idea that you know every not every year, but also like
mm,
potentially every at the end of every political term or the start of every
mm.
term, where the prime minister has to go to
Yeah,
up
yeah,
at
yeah,
Buckingham
yeah.
Palace, chosen to form a government and whatnot, yada 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 yada. But you had something similar to that, but also there would be the equivalent of the State of the Union, maybe during the middle part of the government's term, done by the head of state,
Oh,
who would go, right,
okay. So is
okay,
that's
this
interesting.
is
So is that
yeah,
a political or a state? I mean, it's called State of the Union in America, and it's done by
mm,
the president. But that's because the
it
president
is,
combines both roles.
yeah, absolutely,
You could
yeah,
argue that sort of State of the Union is a political address that the prime
you
minister
could,
should give.
yeah, you could,
Um,
mm, don't know,
so that's an interesting concept. So yeah, I'm okay. You're kind of winning me over to the idea that one of the things that the royal family isn't is representative of modern Britain.
mm,
I mean, they're obviously a single family. They've got their own
mm,
roots, mostly German,
mm.
but from all over Europe, um, and um, and they don't reflect. I mean, this was one of the comments over the royal wedding. The family itself doesn't reflect the diversity. So I suppose there would be an
Terribly
argument
white,
there.
I think is the term.
Yes, the terribly white comment. So there'd be an argument there that if you did elect people locally and regionally, then
Mm,
you would have a much more diverse group of people coming together. I think that's
mm,
true. That's unarguable. I
mm.
think, and you could say that better represents the local people, particularly if it was sourced locally rather than centrally.
Yeah,
I guess though, would that work as a group of people you lump together, and
yeah,
not is that a family? Whatever you're going to call it, you
yeah.
probably wouldn't call it a family. But would they see they have to line up with what they say and what they do and agree
Correct.
things and so that's the bit I'm a little. I mean, I
Yeah.
see how Scandinavian systems work, and some
Mm,
others, and some still have a royal family and some don't. But I guess when it's a small country, it's possible for one or two people to cover most of the things that
yeah,
are
it's
going on.
homogenous.
It would be too big here.
Yeah.
So it's the need for the number of personnel, and they couldn't just be humble functionaries. You've got to have people who are the face of the head of state.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm not saying it wouldn't work, but I'm not
Yeah.
understanding
No, no,
if
I
you did
just
elect I mean, it'd be a bit like the Big Brother house. You bring a group of people together.
yeah.
And it's about like the Big Brother house in more than one way, in that there's a lot of public
Mm,
scrutiny. You see what's going on,
mm.
and yet you need this group to come together, play together, to work together, to
I
achieve
think that's where
things together.
compromise. That's where compromise comes. You,
Possibly
you
you
and I
could
talk about,
divide the
don't we?
responsibilities so that people work on
Yeah.
separate areas or something. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I think that you'd have to almost go, you kind of work backwards, wouldn't you? You know, what are we
Mm.
trying to achieve? How does the job or the function of that department call
But
what you will
how? Yeah.
achieve that?
Sorry.
Mm.
Yeah. The thing is, when we talk about it, I just kind of think that's going to be so bureaucratic and boring, and all of that tradition and history and symbolism and
Yeah,
the power of that, it sort of
yeah.
evaporates very
Well, not really,
quickly
because
into something sort of technocratic and
if you
anodyne.
make if you make the coronation of the head of state, and not a crown, all that stuff, but there's some symbol of authority that you would use.
Or
For
what?
example, you could, if you want, you could melt down all the jewels and give him a diamond
All
encrusted
right,
suit or whatever it is.
that's a good
Yeah,
idea. So we melt it down. What do we make as the symbol? What is the
a
symbol of the
diamond
new
encrusted power suit, right,
power
for
suit?
a man or a woman.
So yeah, it's not
Like
doing it
maybe
for me
like
in the
like
same
the
way.
nails and chain and so on. Yeah, you could
Yeah,
have something like that.
I
It could
think
be a
this is one of
ring.
the practical problems though, because yes, you can say how ridiculous to have a crown.
Mm,
What's the modern relevance of that? The whole point is these symbols aren't common or garden. They aren't.
mm,
They are things that stand the test of time.
mm.
So I think if you had a committee, it'd be a bit like the BBC logo, the BBC Three logo and all that. If you had a committee to design a symbol for modern Britain, or
Yeah.
like the 2012 symbol,
Mm.
you come out with something that didn't really get it, that didn't really capture it, that didn't really last, and you'd be
Mm.
stuck. Probably be
Let me
stuck
throw
with it.
something at you. Let me throw something at you,
Yeah,
right?
go on.
So I'm a fan of like fantasy books. I love fantasy books. Since I was
Right.
a child, I have done, and
Yeah.
obviously a lot of them they're all monarchy systems of
Mm.
government, feudal
Mm.
governments. They always are in these
Yeah.
books. But there was what I vaguely remember. There was one where like the king had disappeared
Mm.
for no, they thought the family had wiped out. So
Yeah.
rather than replace the family, they had a region.
Yeah.
Okay, and so and it wasn't passed down. I can't remember how
Mm.
they chose the right person or whatever it was, but
Mm.
and the person took on the name.
Mm.
Okay, so the name became the title, and it all went back to
Mm.
the first person that took on the role of regent was called, I think it was
Right.
Brand or something, and then every
Yes.
person that took the job afterwards became Brand, and so you
Yes.
kept that
Yes.
lineage
Yes.
going. And obviously there was a crown involved, but he was never crowned. So
Yes.
when he was given the crown, he would hold it and go, "I will fulfil my duties on behalf of
I
the
would not
people."
wear it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not wear it
Yeah. So you
exactly.
could
Yeah,
that's a good idea. You could repurpose the existing relics,
yeah, correct.
but use them in
Take
a
the same
different
oaths.
way, change the symbolism, and have a different ceremony.
Yeah,
Yeah, I am buying that. I am buying that.
yeah, take the same oaths as
Um,
well. And
yes,
also,
because
Tom,
most of them are pretty good oaths, actually.
they are good oaths. Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
absolutely. But you'd also have to. So I'm not an expert
Mm,
on this, but I
mm,
know, for example, so like with I know a little bit about this. Just say with like offshore trusts, for
mm.
example, the role of the trustee is obviously you
Yeah,
have to manage the trust, but
yeah.
there are things written in law that the
Mm,
trustees cannot break. Okay,
mm,
so you always have to act in the best interest of
mm.
the trustees or something like that. If you're the trust
Yeah.
owner, you can't take the money for yourself because it's
Mm-hmm,
not in the best interest of the trustee for you to do that. And if you
mm-hmm,
break trust law, you go to prison.
mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think people stepping into this role, you would need to have those extreme like
Protections. Yeah,
caveats
yeah,
in place
yeah,
and
yeah.
go if you are found to be moving the needle one way or the other that is not driven by
You
fact,
you could be
for example,
sacked. Yeah,
you can
yeah,
be sacked or you can
yeah,
be
yeah.
even faced criminal charges because your job
Mm,
is to remain
mm,
politically
mm,
neutral
mm.
unless you
Okay.
can justify why an intervention is required.
Mm,
Okay, so there'd have to be some way of doing it,
mm.
but I think what we're showing here is there may be ways that you can do it, and I
Yeah.
like the idea of having an additional layer of
Yes.
governance, not governance, but accountability on the government, because let's
Yes.
face it, you can get away with murder
Yeah.
now.
In
Yeah.
fact, you could
So,
probably make it stronger in the sense that if
mm,
you could make that system work, then you could make it stronger than just a meeting every week.
mm,
I mean, it's strong in some sense in that notionally
mm,
the king has to sign all bills into law, give royal assent,
mm,
um, and obviously has reserved powers that are used on behalf by the government.
mm.
Um,
And stop you sliding into tyranny as
mm,
well. So
mm,
that's an interesting one because again,
mm,
obviously the oaths the king takes, defend the church
mm,
and all the rest of it. I'm not so fussed
mm.
because we're a multi-faith society, and I'd rather they said to make sure that no religion, became dominant. I'd
Yeah,
like
I
to see
was
that.
disappointed
Yeah,
that he wasn't allowed to say defender of the faiths.
yeah,
I
yeah,
was disappointed by that. Although it was a
yeah.
very multi-faith ceremony. I mean,
It was,
we
yeah,
had
and
a
you had
Roman Catholic bishop, and
Hindu prime minister reading,
a
that's all
Jewish
that was
representative, all sorts. Yeah, yeah,
brilliant. Yeah. So
yeah.
I think
Sikh.
like the
Yeah.
defender of almost like we don't have a constitution, but if we
Mm,
had a constitution, obviously you're moving into kind of the judiciary territory
mm,
there. but the
mm,
values of a constitution
mm,
that are represented through actions, you can almost go, okay, the job of the head of state is to make sure, because we hear it from the left all the time,
mm,
oh, the country's ascending into,
mm,
Nazism and all this lot and that authoritarianism, and it's not. But,
mm,
you could have someone go, well, look, actually, we have a barrier to prevent that happening. The head of the state, if they ever feel that,
mm,
and they have to justify, legally, they have to legally justify why they feel the government's sliding into
mm.
authoritarianism. They have the ability to dissolve, the the ruling party at that time or the government at that
Yeah.
time. And it's only done in extreme circumstances, for
Mm, mm,
example.
mm.
Then, and again, they have to legally be bound to make sure they can
Yep.
back it up against fire and all the
Okay.
rest of it. I like the
Yeah.
idea of that. Yeah,
Yes, that could work. Yeah. So we're talking about. I think you'd have to have a fixed term
yeah,
because you'd need to have people in training for years.
mm-hmm.
So if you had a 20-year term, I mean, it might
Mm-hmm.
be cut short because of illness or health or
Yeah,
something, but you'd need people who were whoever was elected would need to go a long-term training program to,
mm-hmm.
years, probably 5 years or something, I would
Oh,
imagine,
yeah.
minimum, before they actually took an active part.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly, what you could do is elect a group of people, and maybe they between themselves elect who is head of state. But I guess people would probably want to vote for their king if it's elected directly,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then they would use the existing regalia and adapt the existing traditions so that you
Mm-hmm.
preserve that link with the past, but modernise in parts.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because you've got that still going on and a functioning royal family. I mean, we'd have to debate whether
Mm-hmm.
we still call them royals or not. Probably would be a lot of marketing value in that. Um, then you could still take advantage of all the tourist income and
Mm-hmm.
attention that it brings. Your fixed terms would give you regular coronations,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't just be the king; it would be whoever's changed in the group, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You probably wouldn't have royal weddings, but that's
Yeah.
okay.
Who cares?
Who
Yeah.
cares? Maybe you would if the monarch got married or something.
Mm-hmm.
Depends how old these people
Mm-hmm.
are. And you're saying having strong checks and balances to make sure that you
Mm-hmm.
don't get the wrong people wanting it, or that they behave themselves when they're in there. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
you're starting to convince me that we could change it successfully.
We've solved the unsolvable thing, Tom. This is our best
Yeah.
podcast ever, I think. Yeah, but it'd be an
um,
interesting idea, and I'd like to
mm,
see how. What I'd love to do is get people in the room. So you get monarchists in a room, you get Republicans
yeah.
in a room, and you go, right, this is what we think is a
Yes.
sensible
Yes.
middle ground. I'd be
Yeah.
curious to see
Yeah.
what people's thoughts were on
I'm
that.
open-minded about it. I mean, what I don't like is when people oversimplify it and forget some of the
Yeah.
aspects of both the good and the bad.
Mm.
And I think it would be given that we have it. It's not the sort of we would never create what we have now,
No,
in today. But given
we
that we have
wouldn't.
it, just to throw it away without thinking hard about it would be
Mm.
a big mistake. I think.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Because you would then end up. I think you would then struggle to create any. This idea of burn it all down and start from scratch. You're just not going to create the whole symbolic traditional
Mm.
heritage, the show, the and the whole point is it has to be mysterious and weird, and because it's about what meaning you can imbue on it and how you can bring
Yeah,
people together. Because
yeah, yeah.
it's something not every day, and that's where I really doubt. I mean that if you think about it, it evolved. That's how we got it. It was never somebody's single creation,
No,
and I
yeah.
don't
Who
think
did
so.
you get
Therefore, I
that?
don't think you could tear it down and then start from scratch. And I
Mm.
think whoever you had artistically, creatively, I just don't
Mm.
think it would work because
Mm.
you can't build something like that
Mm.
in a few years.
Mm.
But I think you were convincing me that adaptation could work.
Yeah, I like the idea of them being, what does your head of stand for? Your head of
Mm.
state stand for? You go, well, actually, really simple. First of all, they represent our history and our presence in the world.
Yeah.
They defend
Yes.
the liberty of,
Yes.
of the populace. They hold the government to account to make sure they're not going back on their manifestos, or
Yeah.
unless they have severe reason for doing so.
Mm.
They are there to represent the equality of the four nations and make sure that no
Yeah.
nation is left behind. Yeah, and
Yeah.
what's the other thing you could say? You could almost build it around the
Mm.
values, and I
Mm.
think that's quite for you to go when I look at say an American who obviously love the fact they don't have a monarchy could go, oh, what does your head of state? You could say those four things, and they have teeth to
Well,
back it up.
there's the weird thing. they love our monarchy,
They love our monarchy. Yeah,
and they
yeah,
and they like the fact that they're a republic. So there's a bit of a
mm,
contradiction there, because I think it points to them lacking
mm,
this fourth element separated
mm,
out
mm,
in their system. Lots of good things about the American system, but
mm.
it only has three branches,
Yeah,
and they're all elected to a large extent, and they're all in in checks and balances with each other. Um,
mm,
but yeah, something above there's something very attractive about somebody above the president or the prime minister.
yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
Well, I think we've
Well,
done a
yeah,
good job there.
you solved it. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we best leave it there. Food for
Yeah,
thought.
exactly.
All
Yeah,
right. Good
indeed.
talking to you, Jamie.
You too,
Take
Tom.
care.
All right.
Bye
Take
bye.
care. Bye.